Hello, and welcome to this week's podcast, Sounding the Alarms of Chaos, Part 2, Tommy Robinson. What we do in life echoes in eternity. So I'm sounding some alarm bells and hoping to trigger some echoes. Are you willing to listen and consider the realities we face? If so, buckle up. This week is my most controversial take yet. I try to never write when I'm angry. I don't want to say things simply because I'm fueled up and end up looking back feeling like I went too far. But this week, I am angry. And it's time to say a few things clearly. So if you tend to need them, consider this your heads up. There are trigger warnings all over this week's episode. In the late 1700s, there was a shortage of tall trees in Britain. They had overharvested their own timber in order to build the British Navy. So Britain desperately needed lumber and had none to harvest. But the colonies in America had an overabundance of tall trees. So the King of England declared that he owned all the trees in America that were over a certain size, which led to the Pine Tree Riots. The Americans didn't want to forfeit their own property, or the monetary value of the trees growing on their own land, which they thought they should be able to use or sell as they saw fit. The Pine Tree Riots were a precursor that led to events that resulted in the Boston Tea Party, which was the catalyst that triggered the American Revolution. So, America became an independent country, and eventually a world leader, because it happened to be a place that had tall trees, at a time when they were valuable enough to be a source of contention. That's why the original flag of the U.S. Navy was a single pine tree set against a white background. The flag declared to the world that we would use our own trees, which Britain tried to take, to build our own ships and fight back against their tyranny. In 1862, a member of the Confederate Army was riding with secret orders that contained troop movements describing where the army was headed. The orders were wrapped around 3 of his cigars, and as he rode, the cigars fell out of his bag, taking the orders with them. They landed in a hedgerow, where the Union Army just happened to stop and take a rest from their march soon afterwards. A Union soldier sat down by the hedges and saw a free cigar. What a lucky day. As he unwrapped his unexpected prize, he realized that the wrapping paper actually had the marching orders for the enemy army on it. He took the information to the nearest official, a clerk, who worked for the general in charge. Now what they really needed to know was if these orders were real or a decoy. The orders were signed by a Confederate officer who used to work in Detroit, Michigan. The clerk who was looking at those orders had also worked in Detroit, Michigan as a bank teller. The Confederate who had signed the marching orders had been in charge of signing payslips in Detroit. So this bank teller, who was now a clerk in the Union Army, had seen his signature hundreds of times. He was perhaps the only person who, it just so happened, could confirm that it was the authentic signature of this man. Because those cigars fell out and the Union Army happened to stop in this very location, and that soldier wanted a cigar, and the person he took the orders to used to work in a bank, the Union Army moved quickly towards the spot where they knew that the Confederate Army was heading towards. The resulting battle was the Battle of Antietam, the single most bloody day in all of American history, and one of the turning points of the war. The British government had been considering officially acknowledging the Confederacy because they needed the cotton that the South grew. It was their defeat at Antietam that caused Britain to reconsider that move and to ultimately hold back. If the Union won the war after all, they didn't want to be on bad terms with them going forward. Without this ripple effect, the Civil War might possibly have had a very different outcome. Our lives are a series of intersecting events with eternally spreading ripples that change those around us and thus the world in imperceptible ways. We each control nothing, but we all influence everything. The tiny choices we make can have profound impacts on the world. So I'm choosing to speak up about some issues that should be raising alarm bells with everyone. Last week, I took on an issue that is very personal to me, doctor-assisted suicide. This week, I'm taking on the most controversial of the 3 topics I've chosen for this series, and it may provoke some strong reactions because I myself certainly feel very strongly about it. And if I'm honest, very angry about it. But maybe it's time for that. Maybe it's time to arrive at a place where we need to be angry enough to do something and put an end to some of the chaos going on around us. I, for one, have had enough. This week I've seen too much, and I've had it. They can slap a label on me for that if it makes them feel better, if it makes it easier for them to dismiss what I'm saying. They can say I'm right-wing or even prejudiced. They can dismiss everything that all the other people just like me are saying by pretending that we must all be MAGA. But that would be a mistake. I'm not right-wing. I'm a moderate and an independent voter. I've voted in 5 elections so far in my life. 3 times I voted for the Republican candidate and 2 times for the Democrat. That's as moderate as it gets. I'm definitely not MAGA. Donald Trump has run 2 times before this, and I voted against him both times. The first time, I voted for a candidate I despise just to keep him out, because I didn't like how he disrespected John McCain for having been a prisoner of war, especially coming from someone who didn't serve at all. I didn't like the things he said, or the way he said them. I didn't like him thinking he was above the rules by refusing to turn over his taxes as part of the vetting process that all candidates are subject to. And mostly, I voted against him because when all was said and done, I didn't trust him. I thought all those red flags could mean that he would abuse his power. The second time I voted against him, I was no longer afraid of any danger he might pose. I knew what he did with power by then. I had watched him for 4 years, after all. Those concerns had proven unfounded, but I was sick of the controversy, sick of the crazy tweets, and sick of having to hear about it all every day from everyone. The Democrats promised me a moderate. They promised me unity. They promised me sanity. They promised me a world where reasonable adults were back in charge, and I believed them. They lied. I didn't get a moderate. I got the most extreme, radical president in our history. I got a border crisis. I got out-of-control crime rates that began impacting me for the first time in my life. I got 2 wars in the world threatening to turn into a 3rd world war. I got trans activists exposing themselves on the White House lawn and fondling themselves for the cameras and the crowd that contained children. I got drag queen story hours in kindergarten followed by suggestive dances and books that are too vulgar to be shown on the news being assigned to kids by their teachers who betrayed their parents' trust in them. I got a fentanyl epidemic that is killing Americans in record numbers and turning the streets of our cities into drug dens. I got a crashed economy with soaring inflation that is making it impossible for me to survive much longer. I got shameful anti-Semitic riots on campuses with no consequences, where they were allowed to bar Jews from the classrooms like a bunch of Hitler Youth thugs. And I got a world where illegal immigrants who have been here for 10 minutes and have already broken our laws get more benefits than Americans who have been here for generations, including unending free meals, free hotels, free health care, debit cards, and even free art therapy, all at our expense and without our consent. I would remind everyone that we fought a revolution over that kind of abuse of power by our last government. None of that is moderation. It's extremism by every definition of the word. I was promised unity under someone who would be a president for everyone, and I have never seen my country or the world more divided than it is today. Between left and right, between black and white, between gay and straight, between pro-Israel and pro-Palestine. I was promised that adults would be put back in charge, as a senile man was propped up as a front for a disastrous administration that I keep being told was historic in its achievements. That's an understatement. And not only did they lie to my face about him being fine for 3 years, calling all evidence to the contrary slander and cheap fakes up until 30 seconds ago. But worse, they tried to gaslight me. They used mental abuse tactics to tell me to believe them and not my own lying eyes. And they haven't learned their lesson. They're doing it again already. Every person in the media is saying that Kamala was never the border czar in charge of that disaster. That's misinformation. They can all be seen, each and every one of them, on compiled tapes repeatedly calling her the border czar and celebrating her appointment to that position as they praise the job she is doing. They will not succeed in selling her to me as a moderate after she presided over the open border crisis and signed the Inflation Act. Yeah, they can name it what they like. I'll describe it truthfully. She encouraged the anti-Semitism in this country with her soft stands after already having a record of being soft on crime, so much so that she even took it easy on cop killers, which for my non-American listeners is a crime second only to child victimization here. I still remember when she ran against Biden and she was ranked issue by issue as being even further left on all of them out of all of the candidates, including Biden. I am a single woman and an independent voter. I judge things on a case-by-case basis. That means, by the stats, I'm one of the votes that Democrats have to count on to win. So they might want to consider my view of them at this point. And if they think that the abortion issue is going to be enough by itself to counterbalance all of that, I can only say that they are as wrong about that as it gets. I'm not going to get into my personal beliefs on abortion. It's not relevant to this discussion. Suffice it to say that plenty of states still allow abortion. The abortion pill is available. Birth control is available in countless forms. And if you hope to scare me with horror stories about rape, I can only say that for a woman in that horrible position to be raped and stay raped, but to have the option of having an abortion if it results in a pregnancy is small consolation. And the odds of them being raped in the first place will go way down from where they are due to this administration. Sadly, not eliminated, but they will be significantly less after the border is closed and these dangerous criminals with prior violent convictions are deported. It's the people who lower my chances of having that happen to me in the first place, and not just to me, but to 12-year-old little girls in Houston, who are the ones who will get my vote. not the people who offer me the option of a very small consolation after the irreversible damage is done. The Democrats used to be the party that fought for equality, for a country whose children weren't judged on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. And now that same party calls daily for racism, described as equity, and a world where everything is judged based on the color of your skin under DEI programs, which are bearing very dangerous results in critical industries like the airlines and the Secret Service. I heard major news anchors this very week unemotionally discuss how Governor Josh Shapiro wouldn't really be considered as the Democratic candidate for VP, and say, without embarrassment, that the reason, in their own words, not mine, was because he was a Jew. And apparently the Democrat Party is now the official party for open anti-Semites. A place where they don't have to hide their bigotry anymore, but can wear it with pride. Count me out. I've had enough. I watched as the future of the Democrat Party, whom they held up as their best and brightest, became squad members like AOC, who refused to do her job this week, which she is paid to do. She refused to show up at Congress because a Jew would be speaking. And half the Democrats in Congress joined her little boycott. Look, I don't insist that every congressperson support the Prime Minister of Israel. They can take whatever positions they choose and defend their choices as best they can. But I do expect them, as the leaders of this country, to do their jobs and meet with the people they're supposed to meet with and take care of business with the leaders of other countries, whether they personally want to be their BFFs or not. I expect them to not just take their paychecks and then no-show on the job because they're having a shameful tantrum. And I certainly expect Kamala Harris, as a key part of this disastrous administration, who wants to be elected to do her job as the leader of Congress when foreign dignitaries are visiting, rather than ditching to attend a sorority party as a nearly 60-year-old senior citizen. That's not hip and cool. It's pathetic and embarrassing. So the future of the party is AOC, a radical terrorist groupie. The party's present is a presidential candidate, Kamala, who chose to go to Zeta Phi Beta's kegger rather than do her job, even during her very first week of campaigning. And even the old guard, Nancy Pelosi, didn't do her job, offering instead a critique of Benjamin Netanyahu's speech like some sad movie critic printing a review in the papers. By the way, her critique was also wrong, as professional critics almost always are. His speech was magnificent, and I recommend that everyone go and watch it, because he was completely right. Worst of all, crowds of violent anti-Semitic protesters gathered to attack police officers defacing the Freedom Bell and the Christopher Columbus Monument by spray painting anti-Semitic threats, quote, "Hamas is coming" on them. They also painted the symbol that Hamas uses to mark its next target, inviting Hamas to attack the United States. They not only burned the American flag, which they have the right to do if it is their own flag, but they burned flags that belong to the government, which is vandalism. Instead of the stars and stripes, which they defaced and burned, they flew not only the flag of Palestine, which is bad enough, but they even raised the flag of Hamas. They shouted, "Burn that shit" about my flag, while also shouting Allah Akbar, a Muslim extremist battle cry. Then they performed skits, in their underwear, of course, because these people do everything in their underwear. By the way, do these people ever stop cosplaying like nerds? They pretended to be Israeli soldiers brutally and triumphantly killing Palestinian civilian hostages. Irony is lost on these people, given that the only side that is actually holding civilian hostages right now, and the only side that has actually done these things, which they acted out, and did them on tape, with evidence left in the form of bodies, the raped bodies of children, left to prove it, who admitted from their own mouth that they did it, would be the side that acted on October 7th, the side they are defending and promoting. I'm going to say this very clearly. Israel is right, and Palestine is wrong. I am perfectly willing to consider supporting a Palestinian state when that day comes, after they stop giving their children grenades and sending them out to die as martyrs. After they quit starting every episode of violence that happens. After they stop committing atrocities against Jews and their own people. After they quit using my tax dollars to build terror tunnels. After they stop calling for the extermination of an entire race of people. And after they quit electing terrorists to be their governments. And not one moment before that. I hope that was clear enough. Hey, I told you I was going hard this time. I've had it. I'm going to say the truth, the whole truth, and sound the alarms, and the chips can fall where they may. These protesters released maggots and roaches into the hotel where the Israeli Prime Minister is staying. They took over the Capitol building, which I've been told repeatedly is insurrection. They basically behaved like a mob of disgusting rabble. And are they being tracked down the way the January 6th rioters were? No. They're being excused and even praised for their motives, if not their actions. I, for one, condemn both. This is apparently now the official voting base for the Democrat Party. The party that once stood for acceptance and progress apparently now stands for bigotry, anti-Semitism, and violence in order to achieve their ends. This ugly streak runs from the roots all the way up to the topmost branches. As I said, both the old guard, Nancy Pelosi, and the presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, with the so-called bright future, AOC and Rashida Tlaib, have nothing but similar past participation and praise of evil motives as somehow good, or at most, very mild and very belated disapproval for parts of what happened that went a bit too far. I'm going to be very clear one final time. I am not an anti-Semite, and I have no intention of becoming an anti-Semite. I like and admire Jewish people. I have several Jewish friends that I love. I am not anti-America, and I have no intention of becoming anti-America. I am proud to be an American, and I am ashamed to my bones of these people whom Democrats have let take over their party. If these things are now the tenets of the Democrats' agenda, then they have seen my last vote, ever. As a matter of fact, right now, I will vote for anyone and everyone who runs against any Democrat. That is the point they've driven me to. I know when you break up with someone, you're supposed to be nice and tell them it's not you, it's me. But I'm sorry. In this case, it's not me. It is you. Which is why it would be a mistake to merely dismiss me as a staunch right-winger that you should ignore. Both sides, the left and the right, have their base. And that's not enough for either of them to win. You know who decides who wins? Independents. The moderates, like me, who judge each election on a case-by-case basis, who might vote one way one time and another way another time, depending on who makes the best case, because we don't believe we owe you anything, including loyalty for the past. I can't tell you what's happening with every moderate in the country. Maybe some feel differently from me. I can only tell you what's happening with me. And I can tell you that it's the same thing that's happening with every other moderate I know and have spoken to. We're fed up. We're tired of being lied to and disrespected. We're tired of being gaslit and abused with threat, shaming, and censorship. We're tired of being exploited for what turns out to be awful agendas. And we're tired of this ugliness that has begun to define the entire party. We have no intention of having any part of that party. So, you can dismiss us as right-wing, or as you'll soon be calling us, everyone, or you can accept that the problem isn't us, it's you, so that you can figure out where you went wrong and fix it. As long as this is what the Democrat Party is, they have seen their last vote from me. And not only that, I now dislike them so much that I will crawl over broken glass to vote against them every time they are on every single ticket. That's what you've created. If it is even possible to ever earn back my trust, it is going to require a lot of years with a lot of proof during each of those years, and not a single whiff of any more of this. And that's after you expel the radicals from your party, including every member of the squad. Let them run on their own, but refuse to include them under the name Democrat. And denounce the radical members of your own voting base in clear terms that are unflinching and harsh. Until then, the option to earn my vote is not even on the table. I'm done with you. Every Democrat politician out there keeps repeating the slogan, "We are not going back." You know what I have to say to that? Oh, yes, we are. We are not going back to your bigotry. We are not going back to your new racism. We are not going back to your state-sanctioned discrimination. Those things are your idea of going forward. Here's what we are doing. We are going back to sanity. We are going back to law and order. We are going back to justice and equality. Not equity, equality. We are going back to unity and accepting differences as allowed. We are going back to safety and stability. We are turning our backs on the chaos. We are turning our backs on the bigotry. We are turning our backs on the violence. We are turning our backs on the hatred and demonization. We are turning our backs on the radicals and dividers. We are turning our backs on you. When you've learned your lesson, then we'll talk. Until then, as I said before, I will crawl over broken glass to vote against you, every single one of you who aligns yourself with the present day Democrat Party and their ugly beliefs. Every single time the word Democrat appears on any ballot anywhere that I'm eligible to vote, I'll vote against you. If you want to explain that away by calling every person in the country far right, go for it. That just makes it easier to ignore you. If the so-called far right is not just the true far right, but also the center right is far right, and the independents are far right, and the moderates are far right, and even the center left is far right, well, I guess that just means there aren't enough true leftists left to defeat that coalition. When you call Bill Maher, who is way left, far right, because even he can't go along with half of the stuff you're pulling and saying these days, that's just going to make it that much easier to defeat you. And keep you out for a good long while. When you turn your own poster boy, Elon Musk, who was the hero of the left, an environmentalist that was saving the planet, into the far right, and start demonizing the man you used to praise, well, guess what? You just gave me a powerful ally. on a hill we are all starting to plant our flag on, opposing you. But maybe that's just me. Why is it important for anyone else to know how I feel about it? Because this all may be fixing to have a much bigger impact on you than you ever dare suspect. Which is why I'm sounding the alarms on it. After today, you will have been warned where all this leads to. Because if you think it stops with a few anti-Semitic threats, a few Muslim extremist slogans, some repairable vandalism, and some beaten and now fearful cops, then I'm here to tell you that other countries thought the same thing, and you might want to take a look at what they've become. If you're unaware, I'm about to open your eyes, just as mine were opened. You probably heard about Tommy Robinson years ago. I didn't know his story until recently, although I knew some about the events that were going on around him in Britain. I'd listened to his story in his own words, the way he told it to Jordan Peterson, and I found it disturbing in so many ways. But sadly, I did not find it surprising. Now I'm sharing it with you. Hopefully, if enough people see this danger coming, we can avoid the same fate that Britain has fallen prey to, and hopefully, we can keep Tommy's story from becoming mine or yours. But only if we're willing to listen, take this warning to heart, and fight to keep this from spreading. Tommy Robinson recently released his documentary, Silenced, and then he was arrested, despite there being no charges. This is par for the course for Tommy. He is holding a rally today, the 27th, in London, which will have happened by the time this article is published and becomes a podcast. For those of you who do not follow international politics very closely, Canada is well on its way to becoming a pure dictatorship. They have no freedom of speech like we have here. And what little they have is being stripped from them to frightening degrees. After Tommy arrived in Montreal, where he saw the family of Raif Badawi, who received 10 years in prison in the Middle East and 1,000 lashes, which were delivered over 20 sessions of 50 lashes each, all for saying that Jews and Christians were equal with Muslims. They tried to sentence him under their blasphemy and apostasy laws, which carry the death penalty. Canada gave his family refugee status, but they have not seen their husband and father since his arrest over a decade ago in 2012. He was released from prison about a year ago, but is still not allowed to leave Saudi Arabia. After Montreal, Tommy Robinson flew to Calgary, where he had a couple of events scheduled. 4 police cars pulled up and arrested him. He was taken in and held at an immigration center. The one thing he was not was charged with anything, because there was nothing to charge him with. This was harassment and weaponization of the government for personal political reasons. Sound familiar? After several hours, they released him. He was not allowed to travel outside of Calgary, despite having events scheduled in Toronto and elsewhere. People wanted to hear him speak, which they have the right to do. They had paid to hear him speak, but they were not going to be allowed to hear him speak. In fact, there were questions if he would even be allowed to leave Canada to go home. They only returned his passport on the condition that he booked his flight out of the country immediately and without going anywhere else in Canada besides Toronto, where he was at the time. Tommy may be facing charges again in the UK for his last documentary, which he put out 4 years ago. His documentaries break huge stories on the world stage that are very inconvenient for certain political agendas. And the lengths to which they have gone to get payback is shocking. This latest controversy started when a video showing a Syrian refugee who is now attending school in England being held down by a white boy who poured a bottle of water over his head. Condemnation came quickly, and it turns out before the facts were reported. The story was depicted as a racially motivated attack, which it was not, and exaggerated as a pupil being waterboarded by a racist school bully. The press rushed to condemn the boy in the harshest terms, while simultaneously raising vast amounts of money for the assumed victim. The Syrian refugee, Jamal, was invited to Parliament. Celebrities invited him to sporting events. His story was even discussed at the UN. He practically became royalty, while the so-called bully descended into a life of pure hell. Tommy was contacted by other classmates of the boys and their parents, who told him this story was being horribly spun. Jamal had a history of violent physical attacks on little girls at the school, and he made frequent threats to rape them, stab them, etc. So Tommy posted a video telling the public that they were not being given the whole story and to hold off on judgment and definitely hold off on donating funds. Tommy was immediately contacted by Mohammed Akanji, who is a celebrity lawyer in Britain famous for defending jihadis, including those who have beheaded people. This lawyer threatened Tommy with all kinds of legal actions, penalties, and lawsuits, which worked with the other people involved in the case, but not with Tommy. Tommy wisely decided to fight this in the court of public opinion, rather than in the courts where politics were being weaponized. As Tommy puts it, quote, "Now, when you see the film, they changed the entire story. If they can change and deceive the entire nation on this story, how many other stories are we seeing daily that are total..." You mean like the story about Biden being competent? Like that story, for example? Russian disinformation, 50 intelligence officers swearing to that? Interrupted Jordan Peterson, speaking about the Hunter Biden laptop, which turned out to be true and not misinformation. Tommy agreed. They hide certain stories and they pump other stories. Why did they pump this story? This story was about supporting migration, supporting refugee status, or asylum seekers. Sound familiar? As you may know, Britain and Europe in general have been flooded with overwhelming numbers of illegal and legal immigrants for many years now, most of which are from Muslim nations. There has been a domino effect of violent problems, including the public murders of members of parliament and the recent election of an open jihadi to office as a direct result. At his first interview, while investigating this story, the teacher told him that he had accepted offered payments to stay silent after threats from the dangerous people involved in the Huddlefield grooming gang scandal. Grooming gangs in Britain are gangs of Muslim jihadi extremists who drug and rape local girls in order to terrorize the population as part of their jihad war to subject the Western world to Sharia law. Tommy also uncovered Jamal's records from the school. He had been called up for disciplinary action 117 times, including multiple violent attacks on girls at the school, apparently merely for being girls, and threats to rape them. Meanwhile, the so-called bully, Bailey, was forced to move after his home came under attack, and his family received threats from the local Muslim community to rape his 9-year-old twin sisters, who are biracial. They had to go into hiding, and the government hid them in the Islamic district, where they were in the greatest danger, right next to the mosque run by the very man who was leading the protest against them. This family was being forced to spend money they didn't have to hide in a hotel in the very neighborhood full of the same people threatening their children over Christmas, with it being too dangerous for them to even go home to get their gifts for their kids. They had previously had to barricade themselves into a bedroom for fear of their life from the gangs of Muslims that had gathered outside their homes after their address was made public and tried to break into their home. This, after people like Piers Morgan and Jeremy Vine and other members of the media called for, quote, severe retribution against Bailey the so-called racist boy, a child, for pouring water on someone under circumstances that the media out and out lied about. It turns out that Bailey had poured water on Jamal after he had threatened to rape Bailey's 9-year-old sisters. And according to Bailey, Jamal had also threatened to stab him, a threat he had made good on previously with other students. So Tommy took some other men and went to the family home to get their things. Then he took Bailey and his family to his own home where they would be safe, and where they lived with him for the next 3 years. One thing that's important to understand about this story is that there were 4 weeks that went by in between the incident with the bottle of water and when the story broke in the news. During that time, they investigated the Syrian family to make sure they had no record that would embarrass the media. You would think they could have done exactly what Tommy did and looked into what actually happened at the school and Jamal's record. But that would have made the story unusable for the narrative on migration. The media was not ignorant due to inept research. They spun this story. At the time, Jamal had a cast on his arm, and the public was told that this was from a prior racist attack at the school. In truth, 15-year-old Jamal was violently beating up a small 11-year-old boy after using racial slurs about the 11-year-old boy's mother, and another student intervened and pushed him off the child. When he fell, as the attacker, he broke his own arm. But he was of a racial minority, and he was an immigrant. Therefore, he must be the victim, which means, facts aside, that when the other student defended the little boy, trapped in a headlock, it was racist of him to do that. The school records and the head teacher's investigation all show that this is how Jamal's arm was broken. Those records were available to the media. But this was not the story the media wanted to tell. So they lied and destroyed an innocent boy's life in the process. The media didn't just fail to uncover the truth. They were told about it all from the head teacher who was trying to set the records straight and by other people at the school. But the media still told the story they wanted to tell. The only problem was Tommy was telling the public the inconvenient truth. So they started legal proceedings against him. But he had proof that the story he told was factual. He had pictures from the families of the little girls attacked by Jamal with bite marks on their faces. Their strategy was both simple and obvious. They were trying to bankrupt Tommy for exposing them. They had nearly limitless amounts of money, and they hoped to drown him in legal fees, and they did. But Tommy still had the school records, the family's testimonies, the school kids' testimonies, and recordings of interviews with 7 teachers who confirmed that Jamal hated women so much that it was dangerous for any woman to even speak to him. 5 students came to court to testify, one of which was a girl named Charlie. Her report card contained 11 A's and no negatives as compared to Jamal's record of 117 disciplinary actions. She testified that during Jamal's first week at the school, he beat her up with a hockey stick. Another boy testified that he had witnessed the attack. A different girl testified that Jamal had spat in her face. A different boy testified that Jamal had used racial slurs about the students' mothers. The journalists who were there to cover the trial covered Jamal's testimony about how much Tommy's documentary had affected his life and how scared he felt, but chose to leave without even hearing the testimony of the other students. They simply didn't cover it or report on it. And the judge declared that the straight A student, with the 4 others, all of them, they were lying. Then Tommy produced covert recordings from 7 different people admitting that they had been paid and forced to sign non-disclosure agreements to silence them from telling the public the truth about this. Tommy also had recordings of the payments from the blackmailer's own records. He produced records from a teacher who witnessed Jamal stab another student along with covert recordings of the victim and his mother, which described how Jamal had drawn blood, stabbing 5 pupils just that day. There are 2 problems that can be seen in Britain, and specifically in Tommy's story. The first is the rise in the unthinkable degree of vile violence that has come with indiscriminate mass immigration, especially from certain parts of the world with certain belief systems. The second problem is a media that's not only willing to lie, but to tell the exact opposite of the truth, even when it destroys the lives of innocent children, and requires a total weaponization of the political systems they claim to love so much every time they talk about democracy. The school was shut down as a result of all of this, and the head teacher's life was destroyed after the school was labeled racist. This, even though the other Syrian refugees that Tommy interviewed from this school said that they had received nothing but complete welcome and loved it there. The mother who had sent Tommy pictures of her daughter's injuries after being attacked by Jamal retracted her statement, and this was used against Tommy. But he had recordings of her being asked about her retraction. She lived in the city that has the biggest Muslim rape gang in England, who were threatening to rape her and her daughters if she didn't retract the story. But she confirmed in this covert recording that her daughter's story about Jamal, the one she retracted, was the truth. So Tommy produced this recording for the court. Tommy also produced recordings from the minutes of the school meeting where Jamal's father, who is named, I kid you not, Jihad, talked about the assaults. But the decision was already predetermined. The judge ruled against Tommy for £1.6 million. Katie Hopkins had lost her home due to the same kind of weaponization. She advised Tommy to strike a deal with them, telling him he couldn't win. But Tommy couldn't do that to Bailey, who was living with him and had attempted suicide by this point. Tommy refused to back down, and promos for his film had already been released, so the public was expecting to see the truth in his documentary. The judge shut this down with an injunction, threatening 2 years of jail time if the film was shown. But the movie was viewed in a Florida town in America 2 years ago. That is the contempt charge that he is being threatened with now. But he's not backing down this time. Tommy has been to jail for his activism before, so the threat of going back to jail worked at the time, and he didn't show the film. He regrets that now. Quote, I should have played the film. It's ate me up for years, he berated himself. Quote, these are adult problems that haven't been dealt with because people aren't allowed to speak, and now children are at the brunt of it, Jordan's wife Tammy correctly assessed. And the collateral damage of the government's lies extends far beyond Tommy. Bailey is still suicidal, according to him. Charlie, the straight-A student who testified, suffered as well. The head teacher basically had a breakdown, and countless families of students have been harassed and threatened, and that's all before we get to the victims of the rape gangs, which is how Tommy first appeared in the public way back in 2009. Tommy was raised in Luton, 30 miles north of London. When he was born in 1982, Luton had 1 mosque. Now there are 45, in a city of 200,000 people. The CIA named Luton as the epicenter for terrorist activity across all Europe. The fertilizer bomb plot was planned there. The 7/7 bombing attack got their bombs from Luton. The Stockholm bomber was radicalized in Luton. Quote, terrorist attack after terrorist attack has orchestrated and come from Luton, Tommy explains. So growing up, I had a very life lesson of the influence of Islamist ideology and what it can do to freedom. His cousin was a victim of the grooming gangs of the Islamic extremist when she was only 14. She was given heroin and woke up being raped by gangs and gangs of Muslim men and had to flee through the streets naked. I want to interject right here before we go further into this. And I'm only going to say this once because I mean it, and once is enough. If you are a Muslim who wants to live out your life peacefully, according to your religion, rejecting dangerous radicals and extremists, and you feel no need to force your way of life onto other people, and you acknowledge that they have the right to live differently than you do, then I have absolutely 100% no problem with you. I wish you well. But if you're one of these people on the streets of my country right now, with Hamas masks, threatening to bring jihad here to my homeland, I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure that each and every one of you are deported back to your own countries where you can live however you choose. But you are not going to terrorize me or the other women of America or harm our children the way you have terrorized Europeans. There is a difference between peaceful Muslims who live their religion for them privately and extremists who want to force their belief system onto the rest of the world. I make that distinction. And I clarify that right now. And I will also be treating those two groups very differently. Those in that second group will receive no quarter from me. Once again, I hope I've made myself clear enough. Luton is one of the most diverse towns, not just in England, but in Europe. Whites are a minority there. Tommy has many friends that he dearly loves and has known all of his life, who of all races and backgrounds. When he went to school, there was the Muslim playground and the non-Muslim playground. That is not because the non-Muslim children rejected the Muslim children. That is because the Muslim children refused to associate with all the other children. At lunch, he would sit at a table with white children, black children, Hindu children, Indian children, all of which accepted each other and were friends. And then there were the tables that were Muslim only. He says that he learned young that there was no such thing as a fair fight when disputes arose with this group. If you found yourself in a problem with one, you would be jumped by all of them. It was always group-style violence. In 2004, after the Beslan school massacre, which lasted 3 days, during which 1,100 hostages were held, 334 of which were killed, including 186 children, as their parents watched outside, dropping to their knees screaming, after which Tommy was changed. What struck him was that this wasn't one person who was a random radical. This was a large organized group of Muslim terrorists, systematically committing this slaughter. 2 weeks later, in Tommy's hometown of Luton, he saw an interview with a man named Sword of Islam, who said that a similar attack would be justified on British schools. Quote, "That was my wake-up call," says Tommy. He started looking into this man's identity, which immediately led him to the man's terrorist group. He started looking into the terrorist group and realized that they were truly dangerous and no one was doing anything about it. Every Saturday, this terrorist group would gather at the local bakery where they threatened and spread hatred, recruiting for the Taliban right out in the open. The Stockholm bomber, an Iraqi Muslim, was not a radical until he came to university at Luton. Like any cult, they took advantage of the vulnerable kids at school and away from home for the first time. They radicalized him to such a degree that he was willing to blow himself up and did. Remind you of anything you're seeing on our college campuses lately? Tommy began organizing local people into a protest called Ban the Luton Taliban. He made leaflets and even gave a presentation at Oxford University. The leaflets basically said that people of all races, white and black, were being racially targeted in Luton, and no one was doing anything about it. If you are under the mistaken belief that Democrats are kind of promoting right now, that if you're a person of color, whatever color that may be, brown, black, whatever, that these people will see you as an ally, I got news for you. You may see them as allies, but they don't see you that way. Because in England, they've been attacking people of all colors. There was a 2-tier police system where the police feared the Islamic community and therefore let them get away with open crimes, like rape gangs, while doing nothing to protect the rest of the citizens. He describes how those gangs used drugs to addict children and lure them into pedophilic situations known as grooming gangs. Tommy acknowledges that Luton had a lot of problems and violence before Islamic extremists became a problem there. It's a very poor town with a very rough culture. Still, about 200 Englishmen showed up for this protest, as did the police. So that Saturday, the terrorist group did not show at the bakery. This was before the 7/7 attacks started waking the people of Britain up. Even today, 60% of the Muslims in British jails right now are members of this very group from Luton. After Tommy exposed the link between non-religious, just typical drug gangs, in this case a Pakistani gang called the Gambinos, and the jihadist groups who used them, the drug dealers began to target Tommy. They had already driven the Jews out of Luton and turned the old synagogue there into the Luton Islamic Center, the city's main Salafist mosque. He began researching this mosque after his Muslim friends told him privately that this is where the trouble was coming from. Tommy painstakingly translated their entire website, which contained a 7-page justification for lashing women to punish them for adultery and the killing of apostates, etc., right on their own mosque's website. After translating their own material so that all could see it, he faced a backlash from their henchmen, the Pakistani drug gangs. Tommy's group and the drug gangs regularly clashed over the next 5 years. These were men who had all gone to school together in the same town. The gangs came to resent Tommy even further for warning off the families of girls they were trying to groom. He had seen them recruit girls as young as 13, treating them well at first, giving them money and gifts, making them feel important by driving them around in their sports cars, making them feel grown up by letting them drink alcohol, and gradually getting them hooked on drugs. And then the girls would disappear into a life of forced prostitution. He knew many victims of these gang rape schemes, including his cousin and many girls he went to school with. By 2009, Tommy owned 2 businesses and 7 properties with his wife. They were doing well for themselves. The local Royal Anglian Regiment was having a small homecoming parade for the local boys. 20-year-old Scott Mugridge, a local boy, had been killed, and 20-year-old Michael Swain had lost both his legs. So Tommy showed up with his cousin to pay his respects at the mostly unpublicized local parade for the lads. He immediately noticed about 20 women in full niqabs. Then he recognized the Sword of Islam was there too. Then he began recognizing more and more of the Muslim terrorists in the crowd, along with policemen everywhere. Unbeknownst to him, there were more than 360 other Muslims on their way who were being stopped on the roads by police. The mosques in Luton had been leafleted for this. They had planned an attack on the armed forces, coordinated and organized beforehand. According to Tommy, the police actually helped this Muslim group, who had known ties to ISIS, reach the town hall, where they were in position to start spitting on the returning soldiers and even in the face of Scott's mother, the mother of the dead soldier, who had died in Germany, not in the Middle East. Tommy says the years of tension had reduced Luton to a powder keg. Many of the residents resented that the only time that the name of their town, of which they were still very proud, was ever mentioned was in connection with terrorism. They were tired of being bullied on their own streets, and now they were watching their nation's heroes be assaulted. The citizens of Luton angrily watched as the police turned their backs on the Muslims hurling abuse at the soldiers to defend the terrorists from the crowd of Englishmen of all races and backgrounds. The Luton police force was also outraged. The next day, they showed up wearing Union Jack badges that said British police support British armed forces. They were ordered to remove the badges. They refused. 60 of them organized a walkout, and the local police weren't alone in knowing that they could no longer allow this. The question that Tommy asked himself, The question I'm hoping you will ask yourself is, if we allow this, what will they do next? So Tommy organized a demonstration called the United People of Luton to show the world that it was not the people of Luton who were against the veterans of their armed forces. It was this specific group of jihadists, who are now a designated terrorist group, by the way. These protesters were tired of having to send their mothers and daughters onto Luton's dangerous streets with these people. They wanted these terrorist groups banned. Two-tier policing is a term we are only beginning to use here in the U.S., but this has been going on for a long time in Britain. Tommy grew up seeing it in a town where 50 to 60% of the population is Muslim and were policed differently than everyone else. So he was smart enough to hire a cameraman to film his protest in support of the armed forces. Tommy was angry that his protesters were patted down and even assaulted while not a finger had been laid on the jihadists committing legal assault on veterans. Kind of like I'm tired of hearing the same people who condemn insurrection, who hunted down the participants, which I agree with, then refusing to do the same to their own voting base when they have done the same thing several times. The police blocked the protesters from reaching the war memorial at the town hall and held them for 3 hours, forcing women who were part of the protest to urinate in the street because they wouldn't let them leave. Tommy correctly points out that there is no way they would force a Muslim woman to urinate in the streets. Ever. The police even knocked out the teeth of Tommy's black friend Craig. Once the protest was over, the weaponization of the double system didn't stop. Homes of the protesters were raided, including Tommy's mother's home. At every home, one person was arrested as an intimidation tactic. They were eventually released after being banned from going to the town hall for the next 3 months. Tommy had asked that the terrorists be banned from the town, and instead it was the local citizens who were being banned. So Tommy organized another protest. He tried to talk to the police about how downtrodden the people were from years of this treatment and living in the middle of all this danger. He warned them in peaceful sincerity that the city was close to a breaking point. He pled with them to let the protesters go to the war memorial and have their say in order to calm the tensions. Since some of the protesters were banned from going to the town hall where the memorial was, all the protesters wore masks in a show of unity. The media tried to use this to claim that these were outsiders, protesters bussed in from elsewhere rather than the citizens of Luton. The protest banners were clear. Muslims, no problem. Extremist Muslim, big problem. And that needs to become the hill that we are all prepared to die on here in the U.S. if we don't want to end up in Tommy's world. Tommy had been targeted for his activism before by the drug gangs, having his home attacked and his windows smashed. By now, he had learned to use a fake name when exposing all of this to the world. For a year, he used the fake name Tommy Robinson and wore a mask. But he knew he had finally been discovered when a Times reporter showed up at his mom's house looking for Stephen. By this point, his fake name was known throughout the UK, so being exposed was truly dangerous. He met with the Times reporter, who simply wanted to notify him that, quote, "Tomorrow your life changes, Stephen. Tomorrow you're on the front page of the papers." By this point, Tommy's group had spread beyond Luton. In Birmingham, they had formed the English Defence League, which was when Tommy first clashed with the media. There was a newspaper article with a photo of a boy in a green shirt being jumped at a bus stop by an entire mob of Muslim extremists who were beating him up on the ground and stomping on his head. Under the picture, the media ran the description, "A fascist is attacked by anti-fascists." The banners now read, "Victims of jihad in Nigeria, we stand with you," because they had countless photos and videos of their own innocent protesters being violently attacked by Muslim jihadist gangs, just like that boy at the bus stop. By this point, Tommy was down the rabbit hole. He was watching what the media was doing. When 5 Christian churches were blown up on Christmas Day, it didn't even make the BBC. He was following stories of Christians being violently and horrifically persecuted by Muslim jihadists around the world, as the news consistently didn't bother to be reported in the West. Tommy's own protesters were so violently attacked by these gangs that police were forced to barricade them into a building for 2 hours, then drive a bus up and evacuate them because the streets had turned so violent. Right after these gangs took over a church in Manchester, where they began bulldozing the Christian graves and headstones, thousands of protesters came to join with Tommy against this sort of thing, which was becoming commonplace in Britain. As Tommy traveled to these different towns for different protests, he met people and realized that what was happening in Luton was happening everywhere. He talked to families whose little girls had gone missing for weeks with grooming gangs. Around this time, Tommy went on Jeremy Paxman's show, who scoffed at what he claimed was non-existent grooming gangs. Yet another familiar tactic, one we saw here when Antifa first got started, but supposedly didn't exist. Of course, in both cases, those claims eventually stopped when the factual reality of the existence of these groups became undeniable. In Blackpool, Tommy talked to a man whose daughter had been taken by one of these gangs, and they would call him on the telephone and make him listen every time they gang raped her. Go watch some U.S. border videos as they ask people where they're from. You'll be surprised at how many of them are from Muslim countries, not South American ones. You'll be surprised at how many of them are from China. I promise you, you do not want Europe's reality to become the reality for the United States. And there's only one way to stop it. Close the border and deport everyone who is not here legally. And anyone who has ties to any jihadist group, whether they're here legally or not. And there's only one time to do it, before it's too late, and that's right now. Or, when this happens to your wives and daughters, don't say that I and others didn't warn you. These grooming gangs were thoroughly documented in Tommy's 5-part series, which you can go see for yourself. As I've been saying, even a few people can make a difference. Before Tommy formed the English Defense League, there were virtually no arrests among these gang members. But ever since, these same graphs have shown a steady increase in the arrest as the public in Britain has become unavoidably aware of the problem they've imported. The United States has the opportunity to wake up before we find ourselves on the same boat. Tommy virtually single-handedly finally forced the media to report the awful truth about these gangs. But he has paid a heavy price, which he continues to pay. And I promise you, you want to stop this before stopping it means that you have to pay the same price he did. Quote, "It's not merely cowardice, although there's plenty of that," Jordan explains. "It's also the fact that, look, it's a lot easier to write you off than admit that there are gangs of people who've been brought into the country who have set out maliciously and with intent to rape thousands of girls. So it's a hell of a lot easier to write you off as far right and extremist than it is to even begin to contemplate what that might mean. But that's what I'm asking you to do. Don't write it off. It is an extreme story. It's also a true story. Check me out. Whether you already know about some of this or whether this is completely new to you, do even a little bit of digging into it and you'll find out that as shocking as it is, it's the reality Europe now finds itself in. Go listen to Douglas Murray and others like him. He warned Europe for years. They didn't listen. We can. If we don't open our eyes to the threat that is coming and take it seriously and stop it now, then in only a few short years at most, this will be our reality too. How many times in this article have I pointed out the parallels between the present day stories in America and the events in this story a few years ago? How far down this path do you want to let it go before standing up, as you know you'll have to eventually do? Once the truth broke in Britain and police were forced to investigate, horror stories were uncovered everywhere. In 2015, in Rotherham, which only has a 3.7% Muslim population, but over 1,400 children as young as 11 had been kidnapped, beaten, and raped by these grooming gangs. As Jordan said, quote, "The way you react when you come across a story like that is, it's something like, there's just no way this can possibly be true. But it's not only true, it's far worse than you ever dare imagine." In the reports on Rotherham, for example, one father had called the British equivalent of 911 over 200 times for his daughter. The report also talked about two fathers who got together to save their two 13-year-old daughters from the house where they were being held and raped by gangs of Muslim adults. The good news is that the police showed up. The bad news is that they arrested the fathers, not the rapists. The worst news is that they left the 13-year-old girls with their rapist in that house. The report goes on to describe another situation where a 12-year-old girl was being held by 5 Muslim men who had got her drunk and were raping her. When the police showed up, again, they didn't arrest the rapist. In typical two-tier policing fashion, they arrested the 12-year-old little girl for drunk and disorderly conduct. A different 12-year-old girl was branded by the rapist with a hot iron bar in the shape of the letter M. They branded her bottom with it because they said she was now the property of Muhammad. Yet another girl had her tongue nailed to the table. Quote, "We're not talking about sexual gratification here," Tommy warns. "We're talking about total destruction of the most precious thing we have, which is our daughters." In one case, 200 men were responsible for 1,000 known victims. Tommy did a 5-part series on this called The Rape of Britain. Through interviewing the victims of one town, Tommy identified 254 perpetrators, each identified by more than 3 different girls who did not know each other. That was the bar Tommy set for each man he doxed in that 5-part series. Are we waking up yet? The official police investigation uncovered 200 perpetrators. Tommy uncovered 254. Another independent investigation uncovered 300. Out of a town that only had a 1.7% Muslim population, meaning you're talking about between 3,000 and 3,500 Muslim people. So, if you subtract the women from that number, and the minor children who were too young to participate, you're left with about 1,000 Muslim men. And around 300 of them were participants in this kind of terrorism. That's about 1 in 3. How you liking them odds? Out of the 300 men who were perpetrators, or even to use the police's own investigation, out of the 200 men who were perpetrators, only 11 were prosecuted. It turns out, as Tommy uncovered in his series, that one of the senior police officers was receiving funds from these very gangs. These gangs were just like a mafia movie. The few dirty police do just enough to make the public, that is only half paying attention, believe that they're doing their job, while the operation is left virtually untouched in any real way. The violence works exactly like the mafia. The ranks, from the streets to the powerful leaders, works the same as the mafia. They have their armies of lawyers and their politicians in their pockets. You get the picture. It's a jihadist mafia. But by 2017, when the trials of even these token few were taking place, reports of the horrific testimony were coming out and the world was realizing what was going on. There were reports containing the racial slurs that the Muslim rapist used against these white little girls, which I won't repeat here. There were reports of them quoting the Quran even as they raped these children. Same sort of religious zealousness we saw on October 7th. As the world began to grow truly horrified, the British courts slapped reporting restrictions on these cases. Instead of getting the ugly details from each day's testimony, we got a summary on the last day of the trial telling us the number of people convicted and a few other sanitized statistics and nothing else. They used the excuse that to report on the details would contaminate the jury pool for the other trials that have yet to take place for the rest of the perpetrators. Quote, in America, and possibly here, by which he means Canada, you lock up the jury. We lock up the public. We don't let the public know what to think to keep the jury safe. That's what their argument is for it, Tommy puts it. In Canterbury, a 15-year-old girl who was drunk went to a kebab shop to ask for directions. She was taken upstairs by all 6 workers and raped. There was DNA evidence from all 6 of them. She was found down the road crying, and all 6 men were let out on bail. Again, familiar? When Tommy looked into it, it turned out that the same men merely changed the name of their shop and were still the ones running it. Tommy watched kids go in and out of that shop because none of the community members knew about the problems since there were no complaints filed under the new name. So Tommy went to the court case to report on it. New to journalism, he didn't know that you weren't allowed to stand on court property while you reported. Now, these violent grooming gangs had been allowed to operate in the open for years without consequences. The day after Tommy posted his video, his door was kicked in at 6 a.m. and his home was raided. He was taken to court for sentencing. 2 other men who had leafleted the shop owner's property with pamphlets warning the public were sent straight to jail. Kind of like when the British police arrested people for hanging up pictures of kidnapped Jewish babies after October 7th and took them to jail while not arresting the people who tore them down or the people who attacked those who were showing support for Jews. The men in this case were convicted and got 25 years, but they were left out on the street until their conviction and allowed to run their shop where they were a danger to the unsuspecting public. So after that, Tommy took a course on reporting restrictions. For the next case, he made sure to stand off of court property while he reported to the public on the 30 men that were being tried this time, what they were alleged to have done, and he used those words. He used the men's names because that was already in the public domain from when they were charged. He told the public that these trials were happening all across Britain and were basically being hidden. Apparently, reporting on something that the powers that be don't want reported is a breach of the peace, and he was arrested on camera. He was actually happy because at least his viral arrest meant that millions of people would watch the footage that contained his warnings about what was going on, who might not have watched otherwise. The 30 men being tried for rape were allowed to go home while the trial was being conducted. One of them fled back to Pakistan and has still not faced justice. Tommy was sentenced to 13 months in prison immediately after his arrest, within 2 hours, with no trial. He never even entered a plea of guilty or not guilty. He simply found himself in jail, sentenced to 13 months, calling his wife to give her the bad news. Tommy has been trying to warn Americans that Muslims in Britain have turned the prison system into ISIS training camps and recruitment centers so that it doesn't happen here. The jails are useful to them. The most vulnerable, angry, violent, and resentful people have all of this redirected against the country that they blame via cult-like programming. That makes jail a very dangerous place for Tommy. But the jail where he was taken was one that had a much smaller Muslim population, so Tommy was relieved. By this point, he had been in jail about 2 weeks. He didn't know it because he was in jail, but the judge had also slapped a reporting restriction on his sentence, meaning no one could report that he had been sentenced to 13 months in prison. People were merely beginning to ask, "Where's Tommy?" But American journalists and rebel media wasn't bound by Britain's rules. And we began reporting that Tommy was in jail and was sentenced to remain there for 13 more months. Sorry, Your Majesty. Guess we're still a thorn in your backside. Having already been outed, the judge was forced to release confirmation that Tommy was indeed in jail. By this point, 7,684 people had signed a petition demanding his release. After all, the video of his so-called crime was accessible to the public. All he had done was stand there reporting. He told what the alleged crimes were. He said they might be innocent, but this was what the accusations were. He told how many girls were victims, how many men had been accused and were being tried. And as parents, you need to be aware of what's going on the streets of Britain so you can be vigilant in protecting your children. There's nothing criminal about any of that. They tried to claim that Tommy had breached the reporting restrictions, but that was a weak case, given that everything he said was already in the public domain, which is outside of any restrictions. But as you recall, he was already in jail. 30,000 people marched on Parliament. There were protests as far away as Sydney. This was the first time that most people heard about Tommy outside of Britain. There was a worldwide Free Tommy movement. I was unaware of it because this is just before my mom first became sick with the health problems that would eventually claim her life a year later. Various politicians from many countries were sent to Britain on behalf of their governments, including Congressman Paul Gosar of Arizona and an ambassador, Sam Brownback, from the Trump administration. But Tommy was in jail and basically unaware of what was going on. After being there for 2 weeks, he was moved, and for some odd reason, he was moved to the jail that had the largest Muslim population in all of Britain. When he arrived, he began asking, "Why would you do this? How does it make sense to do this? Why didn't you just leave me where I was?" They advised him to self-isolate for his own protection. He refused to be put with the pedophiles that have to be kept in isolation from the main population for their own protection. 6 Muslims had already been sentenced to 30 years in prison for planning to kill Tommy previously. They were caught with the actual guns and bombs they planned to use. He was taken to the first night center of the prison, where he was visited by a former British paratrooper, who was now a prison officer. He had a warning for Tommy. "When they come to get you, do not leave this cell. Your life depends on it." 2 hours later, several prison officers entered Tommy's cell, including the paratrooper who had secretly warned him. He told Tommy that they were there to move him to A-Wing. Tommy said he wasn't leaving the cell. The man who warned him continued to play his part. He told Tommy that if he didn't comply, he would be put under arrest and taken to solitary confinement. Tommy still refused to leave his cell, so he was put under arrest and placed in solitary confinement. Afterwards, the paratrooper came to see him again. He told Tommy they were taking you to A-Wing, which was a setup. "The 6 men who tried to kill you are on A-Wing. They were handing you to them. You'd be dead." Still, when he was taken to a waiting room to meet with his lawyer, he found himself face to face with 3 bearded Muslim prisoners. It was obvious from the expression on their faces that they were surprised he was there. Had they been prepared, he would be dead. As it was, as soon as the door was locked, they jumped him. They knocked out his teeth and beat him badly before the prison officers got back inside and broke it up. At the next prison, he was kept in solitary confinement for 12 weeks, where he lost over 30 pounds. The food is labeled with the name of the prisoner it's for and delivered to their cell in solitary confinement. The food prep was done by the Muslim population in the prison. So Tommy refused to eat anything that was not prepackaged. He could only afford to buy 5 cans of tuna a week. So that was all he ate. And he lost 30 pounds in less than 3 months. He was only allowed out of his cell for less than an hour for a little exercise during the rest of the prison's lunch hour. He knew nothing about what was happening to his wife at her work or his kids at school, and this was taken advantage of to psychologically torture him. They would open the slide on his door suddenly and ask, "Where's your wife?" He would respond that he didn't know. Why? They would respond with things like, we have intelligence that she's going to be attacked with acid. Then they would simply shut the door. He didn't even have a way to call his wife and warn her about the threats. He believes all this was deliberate and contrived to get him to have a mental breakdown. After all, he was falsely imprisoned. Then he was moved to a majority Muslim prison. This was used as an excuse to put him in solitary confinement. He was forced to virtually starve himself for his own protection. And they were regularly bringing him threats about his wife and mother, which he could do nothing to stop. It was also an incredibly hot summer with a window that only opened about an inch. And it just so happened to open up right near the mosque. So he was having human feces shoved through his window whenever he would open it for a tiny bit of breeze. And he had Muslim prisoners delivering food and things like that coming to his door every day. He didn't realize how much all of this was affecting him until after it was over. He was living every moment on the edge. Every time the door started to open, he got ready for whatever might be coming through it. Every day he was waiting for the moment that the door would be deliberately left unlocked. When he was finally released and the physical stress response stopped, that's when everything took a very harsh toll. Then one day there was a bang on his prison door and another prisoner was calling, "You're going home." Tommy asked him what he was talking about, and the prisoner told him that it was all over the news. He was going home. Tommy had only been in prison for 3 months, so he had 10 more months to go. His lawyer hadn't wanted to get his hopes up, but his case had gone to the Court of Appeals, which found that everything that had been done in his case was obviously unlawful. He had never entered a plea. He had never been given due process. But it had still taken nearly 3 months to get his case heard. He had confirmation that the wheels were in motion to release him, so he called his lawyer. When they got him out of his cell that day at lunch, he asked the lawyer if he was being released on any sort of bail or parole, and was told no, he was simply being released. So he called his wife, because they had booked a vacation the year before, which was supposed to start the next day. He told his wife that he would be home for that vacation after all. Tommy says that there has been a mass awakening to all this in Britain recently. What's been happening on their streets for years, combined with the double policing, combined with being bludgeoned relentlessly for years into feeling shame in their identity as a nation, combined with the ugliness we all saw unleashed on October 7th, and in the protest that followed. People seeing footage of exactly what Muslim extremists do to their victims and not wanting to become them in their own countries. Well, it's affecting even Bill Maher, so what does that tell you? All the warnings Tommy has given over the years have aged very well and proven true, which is also true of people like Douglas Murray, and which cannot be said about the denials from their opposition, which have aged very badly. But as I told you at the beginning of Tommy's story, the system is still out to get him, and he's under new threats. In November, he was arrested at the anti-Semitism rally, where the world again watched as he did nothing wrong and was handcuffed. I hope people will continue to show up to ensure that more injustice is not done to this man. And even more than that, I hope that you think about, if you want to wait around until things get that bad here, and even more of the system is in the pockets of these extremist groups, and your family is under these kind of threats, and you are forced to fight back, when you will be the most at their mercy for doing so. Or do you want to fight back now, when the worst they can do is call you far right and MAGA and form a Twitter mob to shame you? As Tommy puts it, this problem is going to explode, and he'd rather fight the fight now than to know that his kids will have to fight an even harder one at worse odds if he doesn't. Quote, October the 7th really woke a lot of people up. To see, it happened in Israel, but to see the level of hate in every university, to see that our institutions have been taken over, to see the level of aggression and celebration from not just a handful. We're not talking about handfuls of extremists. We're talking about the mainstream. We're talking about Democrats, Jordan interjected bluntly. It definitely seemed that way in the beginning, and I fought for nearly a year to believe that I was not seeing what I was seeing and people didn't mean what they were saying. But after this week, I'm done. Jordan's right. Tommy says he gets messages from people every day saying that they thought he was a thug, that they hated him, and now they understand what he's been talking about. The more they try to stop him, the harder he fights because he knows what's at stake. It will only get harder to fight this fight later on, and you'll be forced to fight it eventually. So if they put him back in jail for this film, he's not going to be silenced this time, and the world is going to see it anyway. And the sad truth is that putting him in jail, where he could die, will only mean that more people will see the movie they are trying to hide. As far as Tommy is concerned, he doesn't care if you came to Britain yesterday or if your family's been here for thousands of years. If you love Britain and you want to protect what it is, come and join it. You're as much a Brit as anyone else. And on June 1st, this was proven when people of all backgrounds and diversities came together to celebrate being British. All of them. They plan to celebrate that British spirit again on the 27th. 2 days later, they're hoping to lock Tommy up. Again. But now there are lots of citizen journalists like Tommy, thanks to Elon Musk breaking the censorship stranglehold. Yeah, a lot of bad comes with free speech. You're just going to have to believe that people are smart enough to ignore the trash. And you're going to have to be willing to do the work to point out how wrong they are when some people fail to live up to that belief in their intelligence. But the powers that be don't have a stranglehold anymore. Not as long as we continue to speak out and let people know what's going on. These citizen journalists, these influencers with large platforms, will be at Tommy's next trial, live streaming every word. They can't control what gets out anymore. Not if we link arms, even with those we disagree with, and refuse to let them silence any of us, so that we won't end up being the one who's silenced later. There is only one party trying to control the narrative. There is only one party who tries to crush anyone who opposes even one of their dictates, whether it's open borders, totally unrestricted abortion, transgenderism. Look, I don't know what side you stand on these issues, but you should be able to make your case, whatever side that may be. They want to control everything from the speech that comes out of your mouth, the pronouns you use, the thoughts in your head, and how your children are indoctrinated. They want to control how often you wash your clothes, what kind of car you drive, what sort of operations your children have. It doesn't even matter if you agree with some of these agendas. If you don't want to live in a world where everything is forced down your throat, whether you agree to it or not, you need to get the people out of power who think they have the right to force their way onto others. While Tommy was banned from every social platform for 5 years before Elon Musk broke that stranglehold, he made a documentary called Panodrama. It was about the John Sweeney show Panorama on the BBC. It contains the covert recordings of an ex-employee of Tommy's who went undercover to work for Panorama as they were trying desperately to concoct false allegations against Tommy. There are tapes where John Sweeney tries to make deals with people, telling them what to say about Tommy Robinson. How many of the media stories that we see are entirely concocted to take down someone that they don't like for personal or political reasons, and who are arranging the narrative the way they want to tell it? Panorama came to interview Tommy, who asked them if they would ever tell someone what to say. They replied, no, of course not. Then he flipped on the footage of them doing exactly that to his employee. Without these tapes, their false allegations would have been believed. His kids would go to school with classmates who believed their father was the British version of Harvey Weinstein. Still, the backlash for releasing that documentary was severe. They didn't like getting caught covered in their own filth. Within 48 hours, he was blacklisted from social media and recharged by the British government. According to Tommy, mentioning his name on Facebook or any meta platform would get you banned. So this should be interesting. As Jordan concluded, quote, "Ordinary people aren't as ordinary as they think. If you leave that extraordinary stuff to the leaders, you get tyrants, which is what we've got now, Tommy agreed. I agree as well. The question is, do you? And are you willing to say enough and take it all back? We working class, everyday people are a force to be reckoned with when we're riled up. Let's not degenerate into a mob like the Reign of Terror, but let's let them hear us roar. And let's do it with our votes in November. I hope every single American remembers what's at stake on Election Day and proves it with their votes. Ronald Reagan won 49 out of 50 states, and he only lost the 50th one by less than 4,000 votes. I'm a realist, so I don't see that happening. No way. All I can do is overshoot the mark and aim for that. And that's what I'm going to do. Sending out my ripples and hoping they make a few waves. I hope I've given you something to think about. And good luck in whatever comes next. Let these stories scare you straight and channel that into a sanity-based change. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next week.